Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. I'm about to start the show, and I just want to tell you real quick, as always, before I start the show, so just get used to it, about my best-selling book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness in Attack Survival. If you haven't got it and you keep listening to this show, go get it. It's available wherever books are sold, and it'll show you how attackers look at you, how they look for your vulnerabilities, avenues of approach. It's got some stories in there from when I was in the FBI. It's got some information about how SEALs think when I was in the SEAL teams. But overall, this is a book that will change the way you look at yourself. It'll change the way you look at the world around you. It will improve your awareness to the point where you can go back and forth from the attacker to the defender in your mind. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness in Attack Survival. It's got 2 workbooks if you want to apply it. And for the children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. You go and you give the book to the children. It's got all the lessons in the pictures, and you go to teamlittlebigs.com and you get the lesson plans. Go get it all wherever books are sold, and let's start the show.
The truth has arrived.
My name is Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. And this is Jonathan Gilliam, and great to be back with you. It's a Wednesday, and today I'm going to be at a press conference in Manhattan at the Southern District, along with the representatives from Voices for Seniors, who are really, it's just a group of amazing people who have lost loved ones in these rehab clinics, and I use that term very loosely, and nursing homes as a result of Governor Cuomo's evil mandate that he did last year in 2020 between March and May, killing literally tens of thousands of people. We don't even know how many people, right? The numbers are not telling the whole truth about how many people died as a result of his mandate. It tells you part of the people that died in the homes, right, that may have died there because they were moved there and they had COVID and they just died, or because they caught it from these other people being pushed in there. But it doesn't even really count the people who got sick from the COVID, were released without being told, and then ended up in the hospital, back in the hospital, and died of COVID. It doesn't even talk about those people in the numbers that we've seen so far. Now, I was going to come on here today and finish with this Time article, but one of the things, and it actually is going to lead into the end of that article, is that what we're seeing now, and when I go there tomorrow, I'm going to talk about this, but what we're seeing is really just the nastiness of the left and how focus, which I was talking about in this Time article, how they maneuver, how they can do things and muster up nationwide or for riots and protests, or on social media, how they can get trolls to go up and just say the most ridiculous things in defense of a leftist governor or somebody like that. So in this case, it's Cuomo. And on Twitter, Voices of Seniors will tweet out some things about, we need to, get justice for this or against Cuomo, or we need for governors to be clear and have clarity in what they're saying, and whatever they tweet out. It's never anything bad, and it's all truthful. And it's unbelievable how week by week, the narrative changes depending on what's going on in the news. Now, as of yesterday, the vile tweets, and these are people who have lost loved ones, okay, because of this. They're rightfully angry. And the left comes and attacks them when they put something out, and they say the most vile things. Like, if it was the other way around, if somebody had been raped, or from Hollywood, or, something had happened from the Me Too movement, and they had a Twitter account open, these leftists aren't going to come and say these types of vile things, but they do that. And a lot of these women and their families have been on television, and they've been discussing these things on the news, and some of the comments are just vile. But what's interesting, what I saw, and the reason I wanted to change, this is going to be a very long show, but the reason why I wanted to kind of shift a little bit today to point this out is because of their narrative. It just jumped right out at me. You know, their narrative right now, every time they go on and attack the Voices for Seniors Twitter page, they bring up Ron DeSantis. And they say, well, you know, the deaths happened here, and Ron DeSantis is not allowing people to, you know, transparency to see what actually happened. And it's not true. First of all, it's not true. Secondly, the fact is that the elderly population in Florida is so dense. Had Ron DeSantis done the same thing, then and mandated it and kept it that way, with these elderly people being shoved into these clinics, there would have been quadruple the number of people dead down there, because there's just elderly people, and New Yorkers just flock to Florida. The elderly people I'm okay with, but the New Yorkers are ruining Florida. There's some great New Yorkers that go down there, but these leftists from New York are just vile. I was down there in, I think it was West Palm Beach at the VA there, and I was signing books one day, and two people that work there came up to me, and you know, I'm sitting at a table with books there, and this one lady, I really, you know, a guy being a jerk, that's one thing, but a woman coming up and just being psychotic it's just vile. Okay, probably gonna use that word a lot during this podcast, but she came up, and she was an older woman. She's probably in her late 60s, and she looks at the book and she says, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, I wrote a book, you know, I'm about awareness and Sheep No More, and, you know, it's yada, yada, yada." And then she said, "Sean Hannity," because Sean Hannity wrote the foreword, and so his name's at the bottom of the cover. And I said, "Yeah, he wrote the foreword for the book, and I host from the radio." And she slammed it down on the table and said, "I hate him." And she just walked off. And the dude was exactly the same weirdness. It was just, these New Yorkers have ruined Florida. These nasty leftist New Yorkers have ruined Florida. Not ruined it, but they put a huge dent in it, that's for sure. So that's what's coming up on social media, is all they want to discuss, and the way they attack is they're like saying stuff like, you know, the fact is that these people were murdered in these elderly clinics in New York and around the country. They were murdered. These governors knowingly put sick people in to these clinics where these elderly people were, and it caused people to die. I don't know how you can meet the definition of homicide any better than that. It's no different than if I gave a child a loaded gun and said it's very dangerous for children to play with loaded guns, and then hand a kid a loaded gun. It's no different. But here's the problem with all this. Okay, so the narrative to the side. I'll just say one other thing about the narrative. Listen, I've said this a lot in the past years because of social media. Choose where you want to engage. Get something out of the argument. You're probably not going to change the way they feel, especially people who would come on a page like that and say, and then challenge them and spread this narrative, because they're either one, a fake account, or they're so far left that it doesn't do any good to argue with them. But if you want to go back and forth a little bit and kind of get, you know, some experience in grappling with these people, it does help. It is a good place to practice that. But overall, it's not really worth it. It's not really worth it. I would just block those people and move on. Block them and move on, because they're either nasty, vile individuals, or they're just not. It's not a real account. In either case, the fact that they're putting the effort in this is very odd, because this isn't just about Trump. It's not about Trump at all. It's about Cuomo. It's about what he did. And quite frankly, these governors around the United States. I think one of the biggest things, and I'm going to get into this in just a second, is the fact that there was no plan for the slowest, most predictable natural disaster that there is in history, which is a virus. You know they're going to come eventually. History repeats it over and over. They are eventually going to come. And nobody had a plan. And then part of their plan, once they started creating one, was to stick elderly people who were sick in with elderly people. That just makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, so I know I've talked about this a lot before on this show, but here's what I want you to understand. This is basically what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, and this is really what you should understand about all of this, right? And it's not that any of this is new, but when you look at it with this example in mind of what's going on right now with Cuomo and his staff, then it's a perfect example of what I'm about to tell you. So first of all, let me just tell you that the legal definition of obstruction, right? Obstruction of justice. There's obstruction of justice. There's obstruction of an investigation. There's obstruction of state or federal law enforcement. It's kind of all very, very similar. But this is the only thing you really need to worry about. Knowingly and willfully concealing information in any stage of an investigation or legal proceeding is obstruction, right? That's really the main thing that you have to understand here. Now, when you add obstruction in with negligent homicide at the least, or just plain out murder, it becomes, it's always a very serious issue, all of it. People have asked me, can they get charged with a Rico statute? And for those of you who don't know what what the Rico law is, it was basically created. It's 35 different crimes, and it was created so that the FBI could go after the mafia, basically. That's what it was. And they could charge these people with racketeering type offenses, and then has to do with gaming and business and that type of thing. And then they added in there these other things like obstruction and these other 35 crimes, so that if any group, right, first of all, they show that they have a relationship or they are working as a group, and of two or more people commit basically two or more of these crimes in furtherance of their criminal enterprise or their enterprise, then they can be charged under the Rico statute, which is a huge enhancement for the sentencing. So a crime that might be something, I'm not going to say it's not going to be serious, but it's not going to be as big of a sentencing guideline when it's by itself. If you are a part of a criminal enterprise and you commit two or more of these crimes, then it's basically going to be 20 years minimum for each of these crimes. And the interesting thing about it is, if there's 10 people that are part of this organized crime group, and the whole group works towards like obstruction, for instance, and there's 5 of them that do obstruction, and there's another 3 over here that commit murder, and there's 2 more over there that are bribing and paying off cops. Well, the whole group, all 10 of them, are going to be charged for each crime. Not those 3 get charged with murder and those 3 get charged with obstruction. All 10 of them will get charged with murder, obstruction, and bribery, because they get charged as a group, not as individuals. And when that sticks, it's big, because it's like big time in the pen for all of them. So I don't think, and after talking to some of my sources in the DOJ and in the Bureau, it's probably never going to happen. Probably never going to be able to prove, unless they do a real deep dive investigation, unless they had been investigating. That's the other problem with investigations, is it's hard to prove that a criminal enterprise happens from the point of the crime forward. You need to have been investigating them. Like you hear that there's a crime or there's a complaint on them, and then you start the investigation. And as you unfold, you're still able to monitor this group and piece together that they are a criminal enterprise. But if somebody says, well, those 2 people over there committed homicide, and they know these other 3 people over here who committed bribery, well, if the crimes have already occurred, and the investigation that has to go forward is going to have to somehow link all these people together. And people are saying, well, that's what investigations is. Yes, that's true. But it's much different when you're investigating politicians. And so that brings me to basically the 4 things I wanted to cover tonight. And that's the 4 major legal issues that are going on when I look at this entire situation with not just Cuomo, but the other governors that put these elderly people into these homes in this reckless, just abandonment of any type of thought process whatsoever. So there's 2 past and 2 present issues that are happening, or that have happened or are happening. All have the double standard of government prosecution applied. And the double standard there is that if you or I, a private citizen or a private company, if we do something and a complaint is filed and the government comes to us, we will be investigated and then fully. There's not going to be any question about it whatsoever. We will be investigated fully, and there won't be a question of, like there is with politicians, there won't be a question of, well, you are innocent until proven guilty. But the reality is, when there is probable cause that you have done something, the investigation is going to go forward. It's going to start, and it's going to go forward. And politicians are not held to that standard. They're not held to a legal standard. It's just as if justice just turns its face to the left and doesn't do anything. So the four main issues, the two that are passed, is that when this occurred, when the virus happened, the states did not have a plan. Each state in this nation did not have a plan. The federal government didn't have a plan. They didn't have a plan for the slowest moving, most predictable and disastrous natural disaster that is repeated throughout history. And we have proof, and we know that it's coming. We know that a virus is eventually going to come. There was no plan. It's like if a hurricane took 100 years to hit the coast of Florida, and the whole eastern border, or let's say it was big enough to hit the entire nation, and we knew for 100 years that it was coming, and nobody did anything. Nobody had a plan. Nobody did anything. We'll just leave it to the next politician. It could be 100 years. It could be 50 years, and we'll just leave it to them and let them handle it. It didn't happen in my time. That's what's occurred. To me, that's negligence. That's malpractice of the duty of why we have politicians. Now, they can't go out and predict every natural disaster, but, I mean, this one's predictable. Oklahoma knows that they're going to have tornadoes. Florida knows they're going to have hurricanes. They have to have a plan of action. And even there, politicians fail every year. And so do citizens, for that matter. But the other past issue is that legislatures across the nation, and especially in New York, gave too much power to the governors. And in the case of New York, they all voted. Give him supreme power, give Cuomo supreme power, and they just let him do everything. And the governors weren't prepared any more than anybody else. And in turn, what happened is that the legislature, or these legislatures, relinquished all accountability to themselves and all the checks and balances when they were needed the most. I mean, you see now how important it is that governors and people like de Blasio, who's a mayor of the largest city in the United States, should be held. They should be watched, and the legal system should be on them tenfold of what it is for us. But it's not like that. It's not like that, right? And because the legislatures gave up so much power, well, these people were not held accountable. And then when it came time to hold them accountable, the legislature was all these different politicians up in Albany and around the nation are like, well, they should have transparency and they should have been held accountable. Well, listen, you're the one who's supposed to hold them accountable. Well, they should, they have to, we have to do investigation. We have to, well, listen, if you were in a criminal position and you were given all power, I'm talking about the legislature here, you're not going to turn around and say, okay, investigate me. That's not the way criminals work. You gave your power to criminals, and they are criminals. So let's move on to the two that actually count, which are the ones, well, they all count. Unfortunately, with the first two, the problem is that the legislatures themselves are the ones that are going to have to change that. And I don't see that occurring because they would actually have to do what's right, not what's political. So Melissa DeRosa, just in case you don't know what happened recently, is Melissa DeRosa, who's basically Governor Cuomo's top aide. They had a Zoom meeting with all the Democrats, right? Which again is fishy. It's fishy. So the governor and his top aides have a meeting with their political allies and confess to them that they withheld information about what was being requested of them by the DOJ, and they withheld that information until Trump was out of office. That's obstruction, right? It meets every definition of obstruction. But I don't know if they're that stupid. I mean, they're not that naive, but how did they not understand how much they're hated? I guess they didn't. They live in a glass house up there, or in a bubble, right? They live in a bubble. I shouldn't say a glass house. They live in a bubble, and they don't understand, evidently, how hated they are. So Melissa DeRosa sits in this meeting, a Zoom meeting, which nothing is secure. You should know that by now. And she says that they did this, and it got leaked, of course. And now Cuomo's had another press conference, 2 press conferences, talking about how great they are and how, if anything they waited too long to put information out, and it caused a gap where conspiracy theories should start. That's what he's trying to say, is this conspiracy theories, and is this Trump's fault? But Trump has nothing to do with this. Nothing. But now the numbers are growing because Melissa DeRosa is one of the people that actually confessed to this in front of all these people. No Republicans, though. So the other thing, while this was all occurring, these other weirdos that work for Cuomo were going on social media and calling people whose families had died and family members had died and who were trying to hold the governor accountable. They were calling them a death cult. So literally, this is how evil these people are. While they are covering up and obstructing justice and covering up what they did, they're also going online and calling people who are victims of what they did, they're calling them a death cult simply because they wanted accountability. They wanted to know what happened, why these decisions were made. That's how evil these people are. So when we look now, as I said, there was 2 problems that are in the past, and now there's 2 problems that are happening right now. But see, the thing with those 2 problems in the past is that that's really going to be up to the states to change those laws and to start preparing for other natural disasters long before they get here, at least have it on paper. They didn't even have this stuff on paper. And stop giving all this power to these governors because it's dangerous. But what's happening now that we can look at is that politicians like Cuomo live above the law, and they're not held accountable to the law. Now, private citizens and industry, as I said before, they are held to a different standard. They're not held to this government double standard. And I don't know who came up with that whole law or whole thing about you can't sue the government. I don't know exactly how they came up with that. But once you've been in government and then you get out of government, you sit back and for me anyway, I'm like, they should totally be able to be sued because a lot of the decisions that they make are completely incompetent and people die as a result of that. A serial killer may kill, 5 or 20 people in their lifetime because of this governors across the nation who obviously conspired together and had talked together because they did the exact same thing where people died, and they just happened to be Democrats. They did the exact same thing, and all these people died. They're literally have destroyed lives because their economies have been destroyed. They have elderly people have died because they can't see their families. They just literally are being held hostage, and all these other elderly people died and people got sick as a result of their incompetent decisions, coordinated decisions. Politicians, this is the answer to this problem. Politicians have to be held to an even higher scrutiny than civilians and to private industry. At least to that standard. They should be held at least to that standard, at the least. But they're not. That is something that we could change. The legal system, the justice system should, although it's so politicized, But this is something that I truly believe that people, just like they're doing with Gavin Newsom in California and now Cuomo wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for mainly Voices for Seniors and a lot of these other people who have pressed to keep even a smidgen of the press aware of what was happening. But if the people got behind this and the legal system started working to hold politicians accountable and to hold them to a standard even higher, just like if you're a doctor and you are held to a standard, if you go out of that standard and you make an incompetent decision and you kill or hurt somebody, not only can you be sued, but you can be prosecuted criminally for that and go to jail. Same thing with a police officer. All these people are talking about, cops are shooting these people and shooting those people. Listen, it doesn't even compare to the amount of people who are dying yearly because of bad decisions of these governors and mayors. How many homes and lives have been destroyed because of the way they've handled this stuff. So that has to change. That would change. That would set the standard. America would be like, we've already gone above and beyond anything in history before. But if we did that, that would be the ultimate. If you want to run for office, you better toe the line, buddy. Because if you do something that's totally incompetent, look, everybody makes mistakes, but if you do something that's so incompetent that it gets people hurt, millions of dollars lost, or industries destroyed, you should go to jail for incompetent decisions. The last one is that the legal system itself refuses to prosecute politicians when they break the law. I know that kind of sounds like I'm saying the same thing twice, but what I'm saying here is that politicians have to be held to a standard of the law by us and by the legal system. The same standard as private citizens in private industry, but the legal system itself has to stop refusing to prosecute these people. Because what often happens, and I think is probably what's going to happen here, is that any reasonable law enforcement officer or criminal defense attorney could look, or let's say not criminal defense, but prosecutor could look at this case and say there's definitely obstruction, potentially at the least negligent homicide and murder. Listen, I haven't even talked about the fact that Melissa DeRosa, that her mother-in-law is the U.S. attorney in the Southern District where we'll be tomorrow. That's where this case would be held. Total conflict of interest. You haven't heard anything from her. And then Melissa DeRosa's father, remember, this is Cuomo's number 2, right? His main assistant. Her dad is the head of the hospital lobby. Now, you could sit back and easily say that one of the benefits for hospitals to get these people out, these COVID patients out of their hospitals, wasn't just so that they could save the public, but quite possibly so that they could save their reputation. So they could say, because they're going to have to report that they had this many deaths in the hospital. They don't want those deaths in the hospital. They would rather those people go die somewhere else. What hospital would champion moving elderly people out? What they should have been doing was prioritizing young people who were sick and moving them to these other locations that they had set up. There are literally thousands of beds that were set up in New York and never used. Some idiot tried to debate me on that tonight on Twitter. Idiots. So the legal system has to stop refusing to prosecute these people. They have to be held to the standard, and they have to be prosecuted. Things like this, a confession of a crime by Melissa DeRosa, is enough probable cause to start an investigation. The investigation that was going on under Trump's DOJ was stopped immediately under Biden's DOJ. And politicians were never questioned when they put these elderly patients in there. They weren't even questioned by law enforcement. It was public knowledge that this was happening after a certain point, right? The legislators gave away their power. Cuomo wrote this mandate and just did it. And then when the people were sick or got sick in there or were arriving sick, the elderly clinics themselves never told the families that it was occurring. They would, if they didn't die, even some of these people died and they didn't even know that the family members didn't even know that they had died until they called up. And in other cases, people were released, never told that these people were COVID positive, and they just buried it in the paperwork saying COVID suspect. These things are criminal. And so far, no one has been even remotely investigated by law enforcement. You or a private industry that does something that gets somebody hurt, let alone killed, is going to immediately be investigated as soon as a complaint comes in. Or if a cop is sitting there watching on TV and he says, wow, that company just caused the death of 10 people and it's in my jurisdiction, I'm going to start an investigation on that. That can happen. But not, evidently, if you're a politician. This is the problem. This is the essence of what's occurred. And it's the essence of what we have to fix. Otherwise, another natural disaster comes along. This is why we have a legal system. This is why we do the things that we do, why we investigate, why prosecutors prosecute, is because we want to prevent these things from ever happening again. If there's somebody dangerous on the street, we don't want them on the street. If there's somebody dangerous in office, we shouldn't want them in office. And if there's a natural disaster that comes around and somebody's negligent and they kill thousands of people, then those people should be prosecuted, and then the next person that comes in should be held to the highest standard. You must have a plan, because if you don't and people get killed because of it, you're going to go to jail. That's how you fix this. But like everything else in this nation, we are just so buried in politics that the likelihood of any of this being fixed is slim to none. And it's horrific for me, having been in law enforcement, to sit back and talk to people that are still in it and have them say, Jonathan, man, you know nothing's going to happen of this. You know nothing's going to become of it. Cuomo's not going to get touched. I mean, listen, Hillary Clinton didn't get touched. Comey didn't get touched. McCabe didn't get touched. Peter Strzok's wife works in the Biden administration. It's extremely frustrating for somebody, for you, for all of us. It's frustrating. But having served and took an oath and risked my life on numerous occasions to uphold the law for the right reasons, it is desperately paralyzing to sit back and watch what has occurred. Now, with all this stuff coming up in the news about Governor Cuomo and his staff obstructing justice, it's important for you to understand the reality of what's occurring, because it's not only occurring in New York, it's occurring all around the nation. States, believe it or not, did not have a plan for the slowest moving, most predictable and disastrous natural repeating disaster there is in history, a virus. They had no plan. When it occurred, legislators across the nation gave too much power to governors with no oversight, no checks and balances. But now, politicians, they must be held accountable to the law, just like you and I, and the legal system must start prosecuting them. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace. I'm out of here.